verehrten Damen und Herren, mein Name ist Reinhard Bütikofer. Ich bin heute zur Hälfte Ihr Gastgeber. Zur anderen Hälfte ist das die Sächsische Aufbaubank, die uns freundlicherweise diesen schönen Raum zur Verfügung gestellt hat und auch ansonsten bei der Vorbereitung unterstützt hat. Da möchte ich mich bei Stefan Weber ganz besonders und bei allen anderen, die daran mitgewirkt haben, bedanken. Die Veranstaltung, die wir heute haben, werden wir, damit für alle Podiumsbeteiligten die Diskussionsbedingungen fair und gleich sind, hier vorne Englisch führen, aber es gibt Übersetzung, es gibt Headsets, das heißt, wer gerne Deutsch reinhören möchte, kann das tun, da wird alles simultan übersetzt. Ich freue mich sehr, dass das jetzt zustande kommt. Das ist die zweite Veranstaltung in einer kleinen Serie, die Herr Professor Ludek Niedermayer und ich uns zusammen ausgedacht haben. Herr Niedermayer ist Abgeordneter aus Tschechien, gehört zur Partei Top 09, ist in der Fraktion der Europäischen Volkspartei. Und wir haben gedacht, es wäre mal spannend, wenn wir trotz offenkundiger Unterschiede, zwei verschiedene Länder, zwei verschiedene politische Gruppierungen, er eigentlich Wissenschaftler, ich Berufspolitiker, eine ganze Reihe von Unterschieden gemeinsam über Europa diskutieren könnten, weil wir glauben, dass es vielleicht auch hilft für eine solche Debatte, wenn man da unterschiedliche Perspektiven zusammenbringt. Wir hatten eine solche Veranstaltung schon in Prag und ich freue mich, dass Herr Niedermayer heute den Weg nach Dresden gefunden hat. Und natürlich freue ich mich genauso, dass wir noch zwei andere Persönlichkeiten auf dem Podium haben. Frau Wolf wird moderieren und übernimmt gleich die Regie von der Europa-Union. Das fand ich toll, als ich gehört habe, dass Sie dann die Initiative ergriffen hatten, die Europa-Union aufzubauen. Ich bin ja, wie Sie wissen, auch Mitglied dieses Clubs. Und Herr Arenhövel von der Universität, politischer Wissenschaftler, der sicherlich nochmal eine ganz eigene Blickweise in die Diskussion bringen wird. Und Sie alle sollten eingeladen sein, sich zu beteiligen. So viel der Vorrede und jetzt bitte Frau Wolf.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here this afternoon with us. My name is Katharina Wolf. I'm the president of a civil society organization called Europa-Union Saxony. This is a subgroup of the Europa-Union Deutschland. There's 16 subgroups in Germany. Having 17,000 members, the Europa-Union is the biggest pro-European organization in Germany. And it is nearly the oldest, with the age of 72. The aim of our association is to achieve the United States of Europe at a federal basis. Independent from party lines, we enrich the political discussion about Europe with a special perspective, that of a citizen. We stand for peace, democracy, and the rule of law, the essentials for a united Europe. So I'm very pleased to moderate, to be here with you today and to moderate this panel discussion. With lots of negative publicity about Europe on one hand side, and with new movements like Pulse of Europe, in some way everyone is involved in the discussion about Europe and the future of Europe. So our objective today is to share some of the thoughts of two members of the European Parliament, Ludek Niedermayer and Reinhard Bütikofer, and one political scientist, Marek Arenhövel. Marek Arenhövel He is a professor of political science at the Technical University here in Dresden. Democracy is his main research topic. He studies questions like, how does democracy work? It is possible to promote democracy. What is democracy? Having spent time in Bulgaria and Indonesia, he has an international perspective on democracy. Ludek Niedermayer. He has a PhD in, just a moment, it's tongue twisting, theoretical kybernetics, mathematical informatics, and system theory from the Pequeña University in Brno. Hopefully I pronounce it correctly. Okay. After working at the National Bank of the Czech Republic and at Deloitte, Czech Republic, he became a member of the European Parliament in 2014. Being a member of Top 09, as already mentioned, he belongs to the parliamentary group of the EPP, the European People's Party, and there he is a member of the ECON, the Committee on Economic and Monetary Affairs. And the third person on our panel, already mentioned, Reinhard Müttighofer. In Germany, he's a very well-known face of the Green Party, where he has had different leading functions all over the years. He has been a member of the European Parliament since 2009, where he serves on ITRE, the Committee on Industry, Research and Energy. In addition to this, he has shown a strong interest in China for many years. Please welcome the three panelists. So, to step in our panel discussion, we would like to put two things together, a short statement from the three panelists and a question from my side to just structure the statements. All three of you have a very typical European curriculum vitae, anchored in your home country, but your horizon became broader with your international experience within or outside Europe. And so I can say you are European professionals. So personally, have you ever been in or have you ever even encountered a situation where you thought this is the end of Europe? Or in other words, what was your worst European moment? Who would like to start? Yeah, just.
Maybe it works? Yes. So first of all, I took the floor in order to first of all thank Reinhard very much for organizing this event and also obviously other distinguished guests. We now have a lot of debates on Europe, future on Europe in our states. There are very heated debates sometimes from time to time. We are trying in these debates show how important is it, but also stressing what are differences between one political party and the other. But there is not a lot of debates going across the borders. It seems that most of these debates are all locked within the country or are taking place in Brussels, where actually people have some kind of suspicion that this is a strange place that it has nothing to do with the rest of the world. To come with the idea that we will have two debates, one in Czech, one in Germany, between different members of European Parliament representing the countries from very different political groups was excellent. I must say that I very much appreciate Reinhard coming with this idea and being in Prague. Concerning your question and opening statement, I want to start with trying to find out what is actually our joint Europe, that means European Union. And you have heard that I'm coming actually from mathematical and economic background, so I have full sympathy for people saying that the European Union, this is the economy. We have a single market, we have a more stable economy. As a consequence, we have jobs, we have growth, and we have the stability. But this is not by far, it's important, but this is not by far what European Union means for me. Some other people, especially this time, would try to say that Europe is about the power. We are now very important power globally, and the power on which people are counting at the moment when the US have decided to take a slightly different route. Power is very important, and everyone is benefiting from that. But for me, European Union is not about power. It's about something that is much more important. It's about the idea of some people after Second War to lay down something, some values, some principles that will unite us, will make us work together, and that these ties, newly created ties, will be stronger than all these things that can put us against each other. It could be all history, it can be religion, it could be wars of the past or whatsoever. And this is for me the Europe. This is the idea to put down the values, the principles that are keeping us together. Coming from Czech Republic and obviously having at least a little bit memory of communist past, I always consider United Europe and especially our membership in the European Union to be absolutely crucial. And I was very sad to see, especially in this, let's say after 2008, people have completely different ideas. And sometimes I feel like alone, and I said myself, I must do more to actually promote this idea. That's why I have decided to switch from quite a nice career in the private sector to politics. And I would say my best moment was when I joined the European Parliament, when I have seen how many people, how many hundreds of representatives of European member states are thinking exactly the same way. For them, Europe is not the money or paid or received or the power, but it's about the future, about responsibility for our continent. This was absolutely amazing moment because even those who are in Czech, majority of people that are optimistic about Europe see the market, see the money, see the power, and are not talking about the value. So this was fantastic. What was at the same time shocking, how strongly and how decisively some people want to remove this dream that became true and to bring something that even they can't explain. And this was really the worst moment. And there are a lot of them, and they are probably getting bigger and bigger. And talking about if there was a moment when I saw that we are at the end, I would rephrase it a little bit. For me, the most dangerous, but at the same time motivating understanding was how easy it would be to remove the Europe. At the moment when we will have no trust, no interest in continuing of this dream, it will disappear. And this is on one hand very negative, because when you are outside of EU institution, you see Brussels, you see buildings, you see the people, you see thousands of pages of laws and regulation, and you would think, okay, this must last forever. No. At the moment when the majority of people will say no, it will be over. And this is scary, and at the same time, that's the chance, the motivation for me to not make it happen.
Thank you for that very personal thoughts. You told us not only your worst European moment, but your best too. So I would broaden the question I put on to the panel, please.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about my best European moments and my worst European moments, and I have the impression that the best moments are quite a long time ago, and the worst moments are more recent. So the best European moment I ever had, I think, was in Indonesia, in the process of democratization in Indonesia in 1999, where I tried to give an idea what is the idea of Europe, what is the vision of Europe, what does this project mean, and talking about European power, talking about the economy, the market, of course, but also talking about the European citizenship, which I regard very, very highly. And my Indonesian friends, they were asking, how do you do this with security, and are you not afraid of each other, and how do you do this? And so they got an idea, and they got this idea of Europe as a transformative power. And I'm not that sure that today I would get the same resonance among Indonesian people talking about Europe anymore. So I have the impression, and it shows, so coming to the worst experiences, that something has changed. And maybe, the worst moment was when it transpired that the Leave vote was the strongest one in the referendum. And I went as a scholar to England, before England, Great Britain joined the European Union, and now just thinking that something is possible, that the country leaves the European Union. I didn't know, well, later I learned that there's an article talking about that, but I thought it is simply impossible. The slogan always was the ever larger union, and this was the idea of an ever larger union. And preparing for this talk today, I looked at my bookshelves and which kind of books do I have about the European idea and making of European institutions. And I found a book, and I think it's quite interesting. It's written by at that time quite young Englishman, and written in or published in 2005, and the title is very telling. Why Europe will run the 21st century. So this was 2005 published. This was a very enthusiastically written and published book about the imagine or the idea of Europe, which would bring about a change in the whole world for a kind of regional integration. So overcoming pure national interests and building something larger than just one country. And the author is very optimistic about something which is theoretically absolutely impossible, but what the European Union tried to achieve, pooling sovereignty. Sovereignty being, the highest supreme power of a state over its own territory. And pooling sovereignty, that means that bringing, the identity and the interests of 28 countries, nations, different histories and different growth and different wealth and different economy, bringing them together. And for the moment, I'm not sure, and I think we already heard this, that we all are really, really afraid of the future of Europe and these anti-European movements we see, and resentments, and political parties, even in the European Parliament, against Europe, which is simply impossible. And so I will not say the future is open, but the last, do we start with Lehman Brothers? Do we start with, I don't know when it really started. So looking at these right-wing populist movements we now see, last example was Sweden, and we talk about Italy, we talk about Austria, of course we talk about Poland, we talk about Hungary, and so on. And so on, and we talk about Pegida, and we talk about the so-called AfD. All these movements getting strengths out of anti-European resentments. And this makes me angry at the first, and it makes me, I feel not really absolutely secure that we will go together what we achieved the last decades.
No, I've got my own one, and Reinhard Bütikofer has his micro too. Thank you. I will hand over to Reinhard Bütikofer. What was your best moment? What was your worst moment?
I decided to focus most of my energies on the European level and to go into European policy making in the context of German unification. At the time, our foreign minister, Hans-Dietrich Genscher, would be quoting Thomas Mann quite frequently, who famously said that one of the important issues that would decide over the future of Europe would be whether we would get a German Europe or a European Germany. And I wanted to help building a European Germany. That's why I started to move into that direction. And I had my worst moments in 2015 and 2016. 2015, when in June, it looked as if under a lot of pressure, including from Berlin, the Eurozone would be broken up and Greece might be kicked out. At the moment, it was in the end the Chancellor that stood in the way of that hypothetical option, which at the time I was extremely much afraid of. Because I felt that this would basically reverse the decades-old thrust towards an ever closer union. And then, just about 1 year later, when the Brits voted in favor of Brexit, I think that was not quite as bad, because what happened against a lot of expectations was that it was not the first domino that fell, that, as some people expected, would then start a whole chain reaction, but quite the opposite. A lot of people started looking at Europe with new eyes. And with one sole exception, and that exception is Italy, in all the member states of the European Union, since the Brexit decision, the respect for the European project, the adherence to the European project, the support for the European project, or the support also for the European institutions like the European Parliament, have increased. And sometimes I explain that to myself with by alluding to a famous sentence from Bert Brecht, who once said that injustice becomes invisible by becoming very large. And I think that also applies for the good things in life. If something is becoming very large and everybody is accustomed to it, it's very hard to really evaluate how important it is. And we really were taught to believe, and I firmly believe, that this European project had just one direction in history, which was moving forward. And now all of a sudden we had to acknowledge that that wasn't true, and it was not at all carved in stone that this would not break down. And I think this motivated a lot of people to think again and say, well, maybe I haven't expressed that well enough, but now I do believe that it is important what has been achieved over the decades. So for me, that was a shock in the beginning, but not completely a negative experience. And when I then saw the movement that you already mentioned, Pulse of Europe, starting first in one city, Frankfurt, and then spreading over just a few weeks all over Europe. I think in the end it was more than 120 cities where people got together to join the movement, I felt, and that was a very happy moment for me, I felt that, well, there are now citizens not just valuing Europe, but willing to stand up and to show that they're willing to engage. So for me, this was probably over the last couple of years the best moment or the best experience. And today I believe, even though we have a lot of problems, and it would be very easy to spend more than one evening in enumerating and analyzing all our problems, I think we have a real fighting chance, and I'm quite optimistic. And one reason for that is based on the analysis that because of what's changing around Europe, we seem to be finding a second source of motivation in favor of the European project. For so many years, for more than 60 years, the European project has been about reconciling European nations among each other and getting past, as has been said already, past the history of antagonisms and wars among European nations. And today there is a second pillar on which the European project will have to be based, and that is that we all are forced to understand that no nation around Europe can be sovereign and can defend its values and its interests on their own. Or as a Belgian politician once said, there are just two kinds of countries in the European Union: small countries and countries that do not yet know they're small. And this experience gives us a new reason for the European project. As one of the founding fathers of the United States of America, Benjamin Franklin, once said to his co-revolutionaries, "Gentlemen, either we hang together or we will all hang separately." So, and that applies also for Europe. Either we hang together as a European Union or everybody will fail.
Thank you so much for your very personal thoughts. And the best example, yes, please. Yeah, I think we can see very good your personal European moments and how they brought you into the European questions and still are the main reason why you're still working in and for Europe. All of you three have mentioned the financial crisis. And as I can see, it is not very often to have a financial specialist and an industry specialist from two different countries and two different parties on the same panel. This sets the stage to talk about financial issues. We just started a little. The euro, the financial market, the taxation, and especially we're here in a bank and there are lots of bankers and financial specialists too. But we decided in the preliminary talk that we, here on the panel, we will not go into that, just because we think you are the specialists and maybe you will pose some questions on that later. The only thing we decided to talk about was one part of the taxation, one special question, which is very on the taxation. And my question on taxation is from the view of a citizen, it is a question of justice. And it is a strong question of justice for me as a citizen. And due to the financial crisis, we have heard that very big companies from all over the world have used the different tax laws in the European member states to pay as little tax as possible. But the European Parliament took the initiative to call for a stronger harmonization of tax law. So my first question to Mark Arenhövel is, because you are linked with democracy and maybe I linked taxation with justice as an important value of Europe and in each member state too. How far is justice linked with democracy?
I think to answer this question correctly, or just nearly correctly, would open up a debate for the whole evening. Of course, democracy is, by all its failures and shortcomings, the political system which has the strongest ties to justice. But justice, if you're not talking of a philosophical idea of justice or even global justice, depends then on laws and on rights systems and on rights traditions. And to harmonize law in something we describe in the political science as a multi-layered political entity like the European Union, because it's very, very difficult to get an idea about how to find just laws and then laws for taxation. Going a bit from another direction to this question is that, in my view, a lot of critics in the last years, or maybe even decades, when we talk about justice and taxation, economics in Europe is linked to the question, well, how much have been neoliberal strategies or neoliberal imperatives who took over, or it started in the US under Reagan, and then it came to Europe with Margaret Thatcher, and that had a very strong relation on economics and, of course, taxation. And the big problem when we talk about the financial crisis and the regulation of taxation on this is what do we do if we describe, well, the financial system as a functioning system, if those elements who are vital to the system do not function anymore. Can we, well, let them go down, or do we have to help them to strengthen them even with the money from the citizens? And this is, well, first of all, I think it's a question for financial experts, whether it could be possible, or even could imagine that talking about this, how vital these institutions is just what economics describe as an invitation for moral hazard, because they know we are vulnerable. And so, my impression in the first time after the Lehman shock, there was a kind of, well, recognition of forms of we need more regulations, we need more functioning market. But what we have witnessed since then, and what we see with Donald Trump, is that he's taking everything back also. So this, of course, is an unanswered question, and I would even go a bit further, and I'm just broadening your question quite well. A colleague of mine who is not an expert on Europe, but who is more in the field of political theory. He wrote a recent book about Europe called Europe in a Trap, or called in a Trap, or in the Fire, Klaus Hoffmann. And there he describes, to overcome this crisis under the imperative of justice, we do need more transfer for something which another political scientist in the 19th century would have called the equality of conditions as a prerequisite for democracy.
Mhm.
And so, as you mentioned, power, we're talking about taxation, we're talking about economy, and so on. But if we look on Europe as a democracy, this cannot function as it is in democracy if the inequalities have such an extent as we can see. I lived for 6 years in Bulgaria, so I have an idea of what I'm talking about. I'm talking about inequalities in Europe. And so this idea, I don't know any politician who is eager to talk about transfer in the European Union. But this goes back to what I mentioned when talking about the European citizenship. If we take citizenship seriously, then we are, well, something like one nation. And talking about nations as imagined communities, then we can imagine Europe as one community, and then the well-being of people in Bulgaria, Croatia, Portugal, Poland, and so on is of another importance than it is talked about now. So I don't know whether I mentioned the things in the way you raised your question, but this is what I would say about justice and democracy and taxation.
Yeah, thank you. I think you added a very important thing. I didn't think about when I did my work for this, is the inequality or the equality, which is important for democracy and for society as well. So thank you very much. Yes, this is the philosophical and political answer to taxation and democracy and justice. Let's have a look into a special in one recent proposal from the Commission. In March this year, the Commission proposed the digital tax. Internet companies like Google and Facebook and Amazon should pay taxes in each country where they gain profits from advertising or for the circulation of data. But generally, in our taxation law, profits are taxed in that country where the company is registered. So, looking at the political situation at the moment, next year there are the elections to the European Parliament. At the moment, the EP election programs from each party are in progress now, especially that from the Green Party. And taxation is in that party program. It is a very important topic, especially the taxation of the big digital companies. And in Germany, a few days ago, we have seen a little article in the newspaper from our German finance minister, Olaf Scholz, and he said he is not fighting anymore for this because it could harm our German big exporting companies. So my questions to you. What is the opinion of the EPP and the Czech perspective on that issue? And maybe then Anna Butikofer can answer to this.
Thank you, Katharina. I guess this is a very important topic. I must say that I spent 10 years of my life working in the field of monetary policy that is closer to other macroeconomic policies. But I can tell you that I firmly believe that there is not a single economic area at which EU can bring as big benefits to 99% of Europeans like in the area of taxation. And before I get to the Czech position, that I cannot comment being in opposition in Czech government, but let me explain you why. And surprisingly, I will not start in the field of economy, but I will start in your field. And I guess it has this question of taxation has raised strong ties to feeling of justice, to stability of the society, and so on. Because the area of taxation shows where the governments are failing. Governments are failing to create the fair conditions. Governments are failing to redistribute the well-through tax system, to which extent, to some extent, this always takes place. And they are failing to go after the money of a big corporation. And this is creating that mistrust between the citizens and the governments. And I guess this mistrust has started in 2008 with the financial crisis, but there are still some parts that are continuing, and this is one of them. If we talk about economy, improving taxation is not only about money. This is about creating fair conditions, fair competition in the market. As we all know, there is not a fair competition if someone pays the taxes and the other avoids or actually evade the taxation. The second, as I said, if the government is not able to collect the money, it is failure of the government. And how can people trust to the government that is evidently failing in a very important area? And when we are talking about the money, I intentionally talk about money as the last, we are talking about lots of money. The estimates are, for example, for VAT frauds, above more than 100 billion euros in Europe. For corporate tax avoidance and evasion, roughly similar size and so on. So huge amounts of money. The third, this is a very important issue from the point of view politics. In the European Union, it is designed such a way that most changes are adopted by the majority of member states and the majority of members of parliament. But some special areas, including taxation, are the subject of unanimity. So that means everyone must agree. And this is a real test in the taxation of ability of a representative of the member states to show the cooperativeness and show the ability to find the compromises. If they fail on that, this would be very bad news. Luckily enough, during our time in Parliament, there was at least step-by-step improvements. And last, talking about digital taxation, I would say that there are three very important initiatives worth of hundreds of billions euros and worth of improvements of fair market competition. The first is not the unification of corporate taxation, but unification of corporate tax base. The second is a reform of value-added tax, and the third is called digital tax. And here I must say that the digital tax, I guess it's not a proper name. Digital tax is about taxing the companies that are making business on your German, Czech, or French market without having physical presence. So this is basically about companies that are making profits the way that was never assumed by those who created, probably 50 years ago, the concept of the taxation. And the question on the table is, if we will be quick enough to adjust our tax system in order to fairly tax these kind of the companies. If we don't do it, what can happen is that in some markets, these new companies that are making business without permanent establishment will start to play a dominant role, and they will actually kill your local businesses that were actually active in this field. And suddenly, without the change of the tax regime, the country will completely lose the tax base in this kind of business. So it's very serious. Unfortunately, and this is important, why I'm stressing that we need a European solution, European agreement. Almost nothing in the tax area can be addressed by one country. Some things can be partially addressed by, for example, European Union, but a lot of solutions must be adopted globally. So we don't have a global solution, and that's why Commission has proposed kind of temporary solution that is technically far from being ideal, I must say, because this is basically turnover tax and it can harm some companies and it creates double taxation situation and all these things. But you must ask yourself the question if it's better than nothing or if it's worse than nothing. And I spent, actually, surprisingly, as an economist, most of my work in the European Parliament since beginning is in taxation. I was involved in every single initiative of the European Parliament or European Commission in the area of taxation, mostly as the representative of EPP. And my belief is that it's better than nothing. Because if we wouldn't show that it is important to tax these kinds of profits that are created by substantial market participation without actually permanent establishment, then the other market players will have no interest in agreeing that global solution. So technically speaking, I'm not enthusiastic about solution, because this is technically or economically speaking, this is not ideal. But most likely, in my current opinion, it's better to move forward. Otherwise, we will be stuck with no European solution, no global solution, and individual countries will try to create their own solution that will just create the mess.
Yeah, thank you. Will you just answer to that?
Well, I would
Do you
go
agree?
a very long way to say I support what Mr. Niedermayer just explained. I believe that tax policy presently is crucial because of two separate dimensions that have already been mentioned, but we should look at them equally. One is the disruptive effect of not creating justice on the basis of achievement, what we call Leistungsgerechtigkeit in Germany. So if you get the impression as a citizen that some economic players are always better off than you, not because they serve the public better or because they contribute to the well-being of the nation more than you do, but because they are powerful economic players, then that is undercutting the trust of people in the whole democratic system. It's as corruptive as corruption is. A former justice of the German Constitutional Court, Mr. Bückenförde, wrote in a minority statement many years ago that it's impossible to have civic equality if material inequality keeps increasing all the time. And I strongly believe that this is a very important statement. And we are presently on a trajectory where we are not reining this in. But the second element is at least as important, and that has been mentioned just by Professor Niedermayer, which is the exterritorial attack on the very basis of our welfare state and our ability to govern ourselves. If Alibaba or any other internet firm can dominate European IT business without being obliged to pay taxes like every other economic actor would have to, that is undermining our efforts to defend European sovereignty, civic sovereignty, fundamentally. So I think for both reasons we have to change stuff. And I tend to share the reluctancy in commenting on the specific proposal that the Commission has made, but I think it is better to start, let me say that controversially, to start making mistakes and learning from the mistakes than not moving at all and just letting things get worse all the time. So in that regard, I'm not very happy about the statement from Mr. Schulz that you quoted. And one last remark there, I think the unanimity rule that we have on taxation policy is not all-encompassing. So I do recall that former French President Sarkozy and Chancellor Merkel many years ago proposed to come up with a joint Franco-German corporate tax. More recently, ministers, the mayor and I think it was Gabriel, revived that idea. And I think you could do that between France and Germany. And I would expect quite a few other member states to get interested if France and Germany say we will move forward together without waiting for the last blockading country from I don't know which corner of Europe. And that's why I believe, yes, on one hand, Juncker is right when he said in his State of the Union speech that there should be some tax issues where we might move on to quality QMV, qualified majority voting. But I think we should not have to wait for change of the rules. We should also use bilateral or plurilateral cooperation among member states to move forward.
Yeah, thank you. We can see that with this example from the digital text, we can see how linked it is with the society and the justice. Thank you for this deep insight into the discussion in the European Parliament. I would like to give the floor now to the audience, to this section of this section, because later on we have two other sections. Maybe you have some special sections on this financial topics, Euro financial markets. Are there any questions? No, not at the moment. So you have the possibility to pose some questions later. So then we will go on the panel to our next topic. The next topic should be, I think it could be very good to go to what we have here on the panel. We have 2 countries and 2 parties. And the question is on, do we have commonality, yeah, that's right. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you. Rainer and Ludek, you were the initiators of this panel discussion tonight here in Dresden. As you already mentioned, that you have had this in Prague too before in March, I think. So I know we have some guests from Prague here. Maybe they would like to give a statement later on. For me, this panel is a nice setting to have different views of the European kaleidoscope. As you already mentioned in your first statement, from the German and the Czech, a conservative and a green, a philosopher and a mathematics. Here in Dresden we have also scientists, but do we have anything in common? So my question to the panel is to grab a word which already mentioned from you, Mark. Many politicians said we fight for national interests. What is meant by national interest? And what is when there are national interests from Czech Republic and from Germany, and when they clash together with other national interests from other 27 members of Europe? To me, it sounds that we do not have a lot in common. What is your answer? Who would like to start? What is your answer? Do we have commonalities, or do we have differences? What is? Yeah.
I would argue that the further you move away from Brussels or from Europe altogether, the easier it becomes to identify common interests. When I'm in the States, or when I'm in China, or in other parts of the world, I easily feel more European than I might in the halls of the European Parliament in Strasbourg or Brussels, because what these external players reflect upon us is their understanding of what they see as European commonalities. And for instance, I've been working a lot on the relationship between the EU and the community of 10 Southeast Asian countries called ASEAN community. And they all look with admiration at how the European Union has managed to bring together a substantial group of diverse countries with very distinct traditions and go about not just sort of stabilizing a status quo, but creating a dynamic that allows all these countries to move forward. And certainly ASEAN is not going to copy the EU. They also have different traditions, but this interest in finding ways of bridging differences through negotiations. This is something that is a shared interest, and I would certainly argue that the art of compromise between different European players may not have been given its due over the last couple of years. And presently there are quite a few players, and you could easily name Mr. Salvini from Italy or Mr. Orban from Hungary, who don't believe in the art of compromise. I still believe that this is a shared interest because without compromising, there is no way of moving forward together. And compromise is the normal, the business as usual way of making progress in a democracy. And if you want to have a European democracy, you also have to have a compromise among European players. And a second shared interest that I would see is our interest in multilateralism.
Mhm.
You have three major global powers at the moment, the US, China, Russia, none of which really believe in multilateralism. And the alternative to multilateralism is what Thucydides described in his book about the Peloponnesian War, when the Athenian general tells a city that they have conquered that the powerful act as they will, and the not so powerful act as they must. That's the alternative to multilateralism. And I recall that when the Norwegian Nobel Peace Committee awarded the Nobel Peace Prize to a Chinese intellectual, Liu Xiaobo, Chinese newspapers asked publicly how such a small country could dare doing such a thing to China. That's exactly this attitude. So as I said before, none of the European nations has a spoon long enough to always eat from the same bowl with the major players. Either we use a common European spoon and we insist on cooperating with other nations that also understand that multilateralism is a principle based on the international rule of law that allows smaller nations to also have a say. Either we do that together, or we will all, in one way or another, fall victim to the more powerful. And I believe that is also a shared interest. And from those principles, you then will have to deduct strategies to bridge differences that we have. And one of the lessons that I think we should have learned over the last 10 years is that there is not such a thing as a dominant answer given from one capital or from Brussels. There are different tendencies in different parts of Europe. So, for instance, the eastern states, the Visegrad group, or what the Polish call the Trimarium group between the three seas, they insist a lot on sovereignty, national sovereignty, and it's understandable for historic reasons. And the southern countries insist a lot on solidarity from the stronger economies. And there's a new grouping called the New Hanseatic League, that's the Nordic countries under the leadership of the Netherlands. And they are in Swabian, in the Swabian dialect, their message is "Mir gebet nix." We're not gonna share the spoils of our own efforts with all the rest. If somebody would believe that any one of those perspectives could be dominant, they would rip up the whole European Union. So what we have to do is find ways of accommodating the different priorities to the point where they can still be integrated, and trying to distinguish those elements from the more disruptive, the revolutionary efforts to break apart the European Union. And I see those anti-European tendencies not just from one angle. If one player like Rutte from the Netherlands says, "I'm not going to share with nobody," according to what Professor Arenhövel said, he's as bad a negative revolutionary as Orban is when he says, "I'm not sharing my sovereignty." Or when somebody from Italy says, "It's always Europe that keeps us from getting what we want, and we want more, and we just have demands." So I think the importance is not just to understand your own perspective, but also to understand the dynamic that you have to create to really bring people back together.
Thank you. You fight for European interests, when I understand that right, what you said just in a short sentence. But anyway, you're a German. You're elected from German voters.
You see, some people believe that it's a German interest to protect the automotive industry against higher European standards. I think that's bullshit, because the longer we protect the German car industry against higher European standards, the longer they will dream of holding on to the combustion engine forever. I recall speaking to a leading engineer from BMW who at one point told me, even 70 years from now, we will build better combustion engines than anybody else in the world. And I reckon the guy may be right. Just the sorry side of this argument is that 70 years from now, nobody will ask for a combustion engine. And if we don't manage the transformation, we will ditch the German car industry. And I could already describe some steps that the Chinese, for instance, are taking to prevent us from being major players in the e-mobility sector. So I would not say that defending the car industry against higher ambitions on the European level is a national interest. I think it's opposed to the national interest. I still believe that there are national interests. Something that I don't see the French understand well is the need to be inclusive vis-à-vis Eastern Europe. I've talked to so many French who couldn't care less about the Czech Republic or Poland or Hungary, and they would be, some of them even would be happy to see these countries leaving. I think that is not a point of view that we can take from Germany. So there are some interests that we may not have in common with others. But overwhelmingly, I believe that if you play your national interests against the other national interests in a way that this creates an antagonism, nobody's going to win.
Yeah. Just nach oben. Ja.
Just one.
Jetzt, da ist es.
Just one short remark. We're talking about bringing national interests together, and then of course we talk about compromises. One thing we have to think about, and which is highly discussed inside the European Union, is because we have inequalities of power, of economic power inside the EU also. So what about the leadership? I would stress responsible leadership. And from history, we know when we talk about multilateralism, it functions the best if we have some force who has the power, well, to support law, system of law, or whatever. And a colleague of mine, he wrote a book about Germany being the central power in Europe, and economically, and for its size. And then the question is, do we as Germans, do we have the responsibility then to lead? And is it possible that smaller countries would follow? And of course, there are with good reasons resentments against the German leadership. And so my colleague, or his book was not so nicely taken by the audience. It's called Die Macht der Mitte, Power of the Center. And so I think we have to talk about this. And we also know that smaller countries, well, in a way, they are waiting for a kind of leadership. And this would be the open question, whether we carry on in harmony, on compromises, or whether we do need in stormy weathers of globalization and emerging markets, emerging forces, China, of course, and the new course of the USA, that Europe talks with one language or in one language, and so steers in better whether any kind of what I call responsible leadership.
Yeah.
Because you would be one of those, well, who could imagine is not so happy with this idea.
I guess responsible leadership is always helpful. So, but let me start with two terms that you put on the table, and these are commonalities and national interest. We are very far away from my home playground of mathematics and economics, but let me give you my opinion, having just very short-term political experience. But I wonder if we are not really just underestimating how many commonalities we have. We are sometimes not creating differences slightly artificially, because in my view, actually, there is quite. If we are talking about big issues, there are very many commonalities between most of the member states. I mean, member states that want to keep Europe united, wants to keep European Union, and it's leading me to the question of national interest. And just starting with a little bit of experience, when I started politics, Czech Republic, small country, we have just 21 MPs. And shortly after elections, I have seen my colleagues MPs saying, we are going to Brussels to fight for national interests. And we are united, we are 21, and we will fight for national interests. And I said, just wait a second. I see that within this group of 21 people, there are, for example, 3 representatives of Communist Party, unreformed Communist Party. These guys that are friendly with Putin and Russia. And some of them believe that there is not any kind of Russian interference to war in Ukraine, and that Ukraine was just a small issue. So I said, sorry, I see national interest of my country completely different way than you see them. And also with some our conservative friends on the right-hand side that believe that the European Union should go back before Maastricht or Nice or Lisbon. Sorry, I don't agree. I guess my national interest is to keep union as it is. So sometimes it seems to me that the national interest is extremely difficult to quantify. Very often it's a matter of political parties. Just imagine if suddenly in Germany you have a green government, then they will tell the public what are national interests of Germany according to them. If, I hope it will not happen, you have an alternative for Deutschland, they have a very clear view of national interests of Germany that probably are not shared by a lot of other people. So very often it's linked to the political party. And actually, even worse, sometimes it's linked to very short-term interest of some people. They would say, this is national interest of my country because it's good for my political career. So I'm very careful about actually that term of national interest, because I guess it's a very vague word that is very much misused, because it sounds fantastic. We are fighting for national interest. But sorry, communists, Eurosceptics, and so on, they have different national interests. The second, I want to say that there are some national interests that I have seen very clearly in the European Union. I will tell you a few examples. For example, some countries in the European Union want to see no cooperation in changes of the tax codes. Why? Because their country is able to transfer the taxes that should be paid in Germany, Czech Republic, Poland, France, to their territory and to their treasury. So they want to see no change. So they have very strong national interest. They want to see no reform of the taxes. But I don't think that on such a national interest the European Union should be based, because it's in contradiction with kind of spirit of cooperation. This is the same, I believe that some people in the European Union believe that it's a national interest of their country that the sanctions to Russia should be lifted. Because they believe that some corporations will make money, they would say this is our national interest. And to say that in Germany, but last maybe I can say, many countries in Europe believe that Nord Stream 2 is not a good thing for Europe. But we have heard many times that it's national interest of Germany because it's good for the industry. It leads me to some conclusion that sometimes the national interest is basically the desire expressed by some interest group, as you talk about it. And then I guess it's a responsibility of politicians to make the judgment where it's really national interest, and sometimes it exists, where it's desire of some interest group that is really not good neither for country or for the union, or it's serving very short-term purposes. And last, what I want to say, I guess is interest of everyone in the Europe that at least believe to European Union. The European Union should be functional and strong. I guess this is some very strong commonalities. And I guess it should be, especially within the medium-sized countries, this should be, I guess, #1 priority. If there is some national interest of Czech Republic, I would say it's functional, strong, cooperating, and solidary European Union. So this is for me, if I want to call the national interest. And the second, maybe there is one difference between the large and medium-sized countries. I guess for us, for medium-sized countries, it's important to keep the Europe where all 28, 27 or 30 are sitting around one table and are discussing the future according to rules and principles that they agree. While I can see some difference, that if I would be representing a big country, maybe I would not see such a strong desire to fight for this one. Because if I'm a big country, I know that if the system will weaken, if it will be much more intergovernmental and not communitary approach, I will probably have a little bit more leverage. So it would be easier for me to push things through. But at the same time, I guess the Europe that would be more dominated by stronger countries will be Europe where more animosity, less trust with each other will take place. And I guess if we are starting to lose the trust with each other, this is not good for the Europe. So I guess at the end of the day, even for big country, that system that is allowing everyone to have place at the negotiation, to be able to express opinion and be able to influence the decision is good for everyone. So that's why I actually don't see so many differences. If we are not going to some low level, if we are not going to some short-term interest, and if we are not talking about governments expressing the desire of the interest groups or industries.
Yeah, thank you. You just wanted to ask, comment something?
Well, I completely agree with what Ludek Niedermayer just said. I wanted to come back to what Professor Arenhövel said about leadership. I'll give you an example, just a recent example. When President Trump announced that he would probably levy new tariffs on European steel and aluminum exports to the US, Merkel went to Washington, Macron went to Washington, both trying to convince Trump that it might not be a good idea. Both failed. Macron hoped he had built a very personal relationship with the American president. He couldn't deliver a solution. Merkel has had a more difficult relationship. Still, a lot of Americans say that Trump respects her because he considers her kind of tough, and she couldn't deliver a solution either. It needed Jean-Claude Juncker to go on behalf of all of us to pull off a deal that might be defending our common interests. Why is that? Because Germany has different priorities there than France has. Germany has a stronger industrial export to the United States. Our machine tool industry exports much more. Our automotive sector exports much more to the US than the French do. For France, the interests focus more on the agricultural sector, or their interests focus on the cultural sector, the film industry, for instance. So when you had this long-lasting negotiation that led to nothing between the US and the EU over the transatlantic trade deal, TTIP, we didn't normally sing from the same hymn book, the French and the Germans. A lot of internal differences. In such a situation, Germany could be the leader if it was strong enough to impose its will and still create an order of which everybody benefits. Germany is not strong enough to do that. Prussia was strong enough 140 years ago when Bismarck unified Germany. Prussia was so overwhelmingly strong vis-a-vis the Bavarians and the Saxons and all the others that Prussia could create a German order that was led by the Hohenzollern. In comparison, Germany is by far not strong enough to be a hegemonic power. And if somebody who is not able to be hegemonic still tries to play hegemony, that leads into disaster. That's why I think the approach should not be to say, let's have Germany as a leader. Germany has to be part of a leadership solution. Without German support, nothing will move forward. You see that when you look at the proposals that Macron made that were basically blocked from Berlin for more than a year now. So without Germany, no combination is strong enough to move the EU forward. But Germany is a necessary ingredient, but not sufficient for leadership. And I would even argue that it's not possible at this moment to just return to the Franco-German axis. Because when you look at Eastern Europe and at the Baltics and at the Balkans, I come to the conclusion that a leadership formula would have to be more inclusive. And that's, for instance, why I was always a fan of the so-called Weimar Triangle that included also Warsaw. Now, under the present circumstances with the government in Warsaw as it is, it's hard to deliver on that. But I think in retrospect, the approach that Helmut Kohl took while he was chancellor was a wise approach. Always taking every single partner in the European Union as a partner. And I do remember that the summit in Bratislava after the Brexit decision in the UK was the first summit to which Mrs. Merkel went after having talked to all the partners beforehand. I recall talking to people in the Chancellor's office telling me, well, in the European Council, there's anyhow just 5 or 6 that have their own opinion. Makes no sense talking to everybody else. They changed track, and I was very happy seeing that. And I think a leadership role of Germany is not sort of going it alone or going it with one partner or just 2. Germany has to be there, but it has to be more inclusive.
You wanted to pick up a thought of Ludek? Yeah? Okay. So I will ask you in the audience, do you have any comments or questions on that topic we just discussed about the 2 countries, 2 interests, 2 parties, common views?
I do.
Just a moment, there is a micro for you.
Gotta get on myself a little bit. My question is a little bit connected to all of your topics. With the rise of populism all over Europe, instilling fear of others, would you think that promoting the European role in the world and promoting the challenges we are going to face would be an option to help the European Union get a better image? To instill a little bit of, I won't say fear, but to instill a little bit of responsibility for the upcoming challenges as a whole union.
Who has the fear, or who should not have the fear?
The European citizens. Well, you know, those populist tactics, just delivering simple solutions and instilling fear. It's what they basically do, spreading misinformation and instilling fear. My question is, do you think it would be a viable tactic just to, use their weapons in a kind of way to say, okay, we have global challenges with the US, with China, we should stick together?
I think this is a good question. What can we do against populism? May I ask it like this?
I would argue that presently we are living through an age where we experience very fundamental international changes. For basically the last 500 years, Europe let's say 70 years, Europe plus the US, have been kind of, and I know this is very rough-edged language, dominating international politics and the globe. First through colonialism and imperialism and whatever. But Europe always stood at the center of international power. A little less so over the last 70 years, it was the Pax Americana. But what we're experiencing now is that the West, including the US, and in particular Europe, have to acknowledge that other parts of the world are gaining in power economically, militarily, diplomatically, and so on and so on. And I don't believe that we will ever return to such a dominant role of the Europeans in the global context. Presently, everybody looks at Asia, everybody looks at China. But you can also look into some of the statistics and you will find that also Africa is going to play a bigger role over the next 50, 60 years. And in a way, we Europeans have to acknowledge that not only we are influencing the rest of the world, but the rest of the world is also influencing us to a greater degree than ever before. And some people are afraid of that. And you look at investment, for instance. For the last 40 years, we have invested considerably in China. For the last 3 years, China has invested more than twofold in Europe. So the investment streams are going in a new direction. And you see now that Chinese dumping exports are killing European jobs, which would not have happened 20 years ago, because at that moment, China was not an industrial power. Now they have a program called Made in China 2025 that shows the ambition of leading the 10 most technologically most advanced sectors by 2030 or 2035. This changes the perception of who we are as Europeans. And I believe that populists and authoritarian movements are taking advantage of that. And they are trying to instill into the population, into the public discourse, this fear of the other. To some degree, they're playing on a reality, because the power relationship is indeed changing. And I think if we don't want to fall victim to their narrative, which says we have to be afraid, and in order not to be overwhelmed, we have to close the walls, circle the wagons, keep everybody out, pursue protectionism, and so on, which I think is a completely false reaction and will weaken Europe even more. Then we have to argue that Europe standing together can shape the future considerably. Individual nations will not be able to do that. Germany has believed in the relationship with China, for instance, that we had a very strong relationship, and we still do. And the Chinese respect our technology a lot and our industry. But even Germany is now realizing that the game is being tilted, and unless we align with all our other neighbors, we might be on the losing side, on the receiving side of the relationship. This is why I believe that standing up for the European approach is a very good answer. We cannot just ignore the changes as they happen around us. We cannot just sit back and say, we pursue business as usual. Nothing really is changing. That's not true. But we have to give a different answer if we don't want to fall victim, I say that again, to this xenophobic, exclusionary narrative. And that's where we need the European narrative.
So maybe from the Czech perspective or the perspective of a scientist, what is the response, or what could be the responses to populism? So we take that one.
This one I would subscribe to every sentence which has been said. The power of Europe, and I would not use Europe as a tactics, but as a strategy to transform nationalism and to transform the we, how we describe ourselves. So transforming from we as Germans to we Europeans with our interests, being security, being wealth, being relations to other countries, and then on another level, the tactic would be how do we achieve this? How do we transform the we do need more of Europe and of European thinking and of chances to, of course, to be mobile, to travel, to have relations, to see each other. We try this in the university level with after the famous Bologna invention, but with transfer of students and transfer and even tourism and all this, so that we get to know each other, we get to know, well, different countries and different regions, and by this, or just the effect of this would be kind of transformation of this we. And this is exactly why populists and right-wing extremists are so against Europe, because it really deconstructs their deepest feelings of their understanding of we being homemade, being very close and going back to, well, ancient history or whatever. And we see this now in some parts of Europe. In Hungary, the constitution was transformed, was changed, and there was a new idea of Hungarism was invented, going back to some 800th century tribes or whatever. And this exactly is the opposite of how we in Europe now should describe ourselves, understand ourselves.
Thanks. I will start with your question and the idea that we will introduce the topic of the global threat and the European role as the important topics to the society. I would be very happy if we can do it, but unfortunately, I'm afraid we cannot. Actually, I wonder how many of you remember what was the key point for European Parliament or European Commission in 2014. Does anyone remember? This was before actually the Russian crisis. It was before Greece crisis in Greece. It was before migration crisis. It was before Brexit, and it was before the appearance of migration crisis.
It was before Trump.
And before Trump. It was called Job and Growth. Do you think that anyone in Germany is now very highly excited about the idea of creating jobs and economic growth? No, you have full employment like we. You have a relatively good, stable economic growth. People are not interested. And I fully agree with you, this is a very important topic. But unfortunately, people have introduced the topic that are not relevant but are good for them. And people are very attentive because the subjects are linked to fear. And fear is very important. So unfortunately, it seems to me we can't introduce the topic that we consider, and that objectively speaking are relevant, because they are introducing topics that are not so relevant, but they have this weapon of fear that works quite well. The second, concerning the populism, I don't think that we can fight this populism by being a little bit populistic. I guess the guy that pretends he's populist is never as populistic as a right populist. So we will fail in this. I don't think this is the way. But we should probably learn a little bit. I remember we had an interesting debate about this subject because everyone is debating, everyone from the mainstream, how to actually be able to stand against the populism. And just imagine the square divided into four parts. And one division is if you say truth or if you lie. And the second is if you do it right or if you do it wrong way. And perception of people from that established, responsible so-called parties is that populists are saying lie, and they are saying that very wrong way, stupidly. While we say truth, and we do it right way. It's only 50% truth because they lie, but they lie very smart way, and we very often say truth, but we say that not very good way. So I guess the challenge is to find out how to communicate the truth such a smart way that it will be a little bit more attractive. And I say intentionally a little bit more attractive because I guess if you're a liar, if you don't restrict yourself by the truth, by the reality, then all universe is yours. You can say anything. There is no limit. Sky is the limit. If you want to be at least a little bit correct, if you want to say things that are at least to great extent true, then your universe is very small. So we are facing that natural disadvantage. Unless more people will be able to make a difference between what is evidently false and what is evidently truth, this will be unfair competition, but unfair competition that we should lose. The last one, role of Europe. First of all, if we, Germans, Czech, Swedish, Dutch, want to make at least a little bit of footprint to future of our planet, there must be European Union. I remember I was talking to ex-finance minister Schäuble, and the first thing he said, I understand if I want to be relevant in current world, I must speak on behalf of EU. It's not enough to speak on behalf of Germany, and this is absolutely true. So first of all, if we want to have at least a little bit of influence, we must we must keep together and speak with one voice. And this is what Juncker did with Trump, and what the others have more difficulties to do. And secondly, I guess there still will be footprint of Europe if we do smart work in the world. And actually, I guess they have never ever been such an importance of Europe as today. For example, let's look at something that is very close to Czech and Germans. That means good global trade, good and fair global trade. Now US is dismantling the system that was created for decades, and we are the ones that are standing behind it, who wants to keep the order, who wants to keep the rules. That means not status quo, maybe change the rules, but keep the system. And now the other countries are looking if we will keep these values, and if it makes sense for them to unite with us, like Japan, like Australia, like New Zealand, like Canada, or if we give up also. So we have extremely important role here. So I guess we will not be a leader of the world by GDP, by the population, or anything like that. Obviously, if economies like Africa or Asia will keep the growth, they will get to quite substantial. But I guess intellectual, and from the point of view of values, and from the point of how we see the society, we should not give up. We should be presenting our model and obviously stick to this model. And after all, it's not so important if the GDP will be higher or lower. And I guess from that point of view, we are currently extremely important, and we bear more responsibility. This is not about just fighting within the EU, but this is if we will stick to this very important role that happens to be assigned to us now. It was not our decision. I guess if the transatlantic partnership would continue, this would be much more easier. But now, because of the situation of US, I guess we must hold more responsibility. And this is what I would ask our political masters in national governments to be aware of.
Yeah, thank you. When I go back to your question, you said who explains Europe, and you answered it is a part of to be a politician to explain. how Europe works and how is it only their duty? That's my question to the panel. Or do we have other people who is responsible? Whose responsibility is it to speak about Europe like you did? You did very enthusiastic talking about Europe and why it is good. You talked very enthusiastic from different view. You said Europe is very good. Whose responsibility is it?
I guess that politicians cannot be alone here. Not only because there are not too many, but because they are not sometimes not trusted, because they are considered sometimes to be part of the problem. So I guess it's not enough. I very much, and also I want to say that negative attitude, not here, not about elites and establishment, but against EU was very much created by the politicians. By the national politicians. In Prague, I call it fairy tale about a nice and kind Prague and nasty Brussels. You have the same fairy tale about nice and caring Berlin and bad and spoiled Brussels. That is obviously not true. Who is making a decision in Brussels? We are making decisions as people elected in countries, and your prime minister or your minister. So this was actually a very important part of the problem that we are now facing. This was created patiently, step by step for many years. I guess what's important is to have on our side, first of all, I believe that more people understand, easy is to convince them. So education is absolutely essential. And it's not by accident that the Eurosceptics, for example, are very strongly protesting about teaching at school about history of European Union, because they understand that if people understand better, they will be more receptive and more enthusiastic. The second, I guess, point is very important influencers, but I consider that it's extremely important to have a good civil society. Because civil society in well-functioning countries have sometimes very strong credibility, because they are not fighting for power. Politicians, they are considered as someone who is fighting for power and will do everything in order to get the power. But sometimes the civil society is very credible, and it's not by accident that some regimes that tend to more totalitarian way of governing are very strongly against the civil society, because they think that the civil society will undermine their plan. So there is no quick fix without the education, without people teaching the critical thinking, being able to distinguish between what is evidently truth and what is evidently false. Civil society, we will not create a stable improvement. So I guess everything together.
So I just have looked at my watch. The time is nearly finished for our panel, but maybe you have just one sentence for our last round.
Thank you.
Probably you've heard of the famous or infamous GINA principle. There is no alternative, which is very popular in speeches and talks of politicians when they want to justify something they have decided. So there was no alternative. Normally I take this sentence very critically, but I think for Europe there really is no alternative. And going back into the diversity of nations and countries and even waging wars or looking jealously to the other. And so I simply cannot imagine 21st century without the European Union. And so coming back to this book, I opened my talk today, why Europe will run the 21st century, I'm not really convinced that Europe will run the 21st century. But for the countries in Europe, there will be no 21st century without Europe.
Oh, that's a good word. Before giving the last word to Reinhard Bütikofer, I will give you, the audience, the last chance for a last question or a last remark. There is a lady.
My question would be, with the upcoming elections, if you could have a realistic wish list for what should happen with the next European Parliament, what should be on top of the priority list, what would be on the top of your wish list? A realistic wish.
A realistic wish for Europe.
Yes.
Okay. So that's a question for the future of Europe.
I believe that we first have to demonstrate to European voters that we do have the tools to solve some of the issues at hand better than we have so far. Makes no sense to go into theoretical debates about how Europe should be constructed hypothetically in the future before we regain more trust by delivering to the citizens. And I think we have to deliver on a couple of fronts that are quite obvious. We have to deliver, and I'm not ranking the issues now, but we have to deliver on the security issues. Europe has to contribute more together to our common security. What that implies is not easily described. As, according to my opinion, we're wasting a lot of money by spending stupidly because we don't use the competition mechanism when we have public tenders for the defense industry. And the EU Commission has calculated that member states could save between 25 billion and 100 billion per year if we would work more effectively together in that sector, which seems to imply a great promise. But however we do that, it's obvious that we cannot rely on the rest of the world providing for our security without contributing ourselves. So there is an issue. Second, obviously the issue of migration and the asylum system. Until 3 years ago, most of the Europeans believed this is not a European issue. This was supposed to be a national issue, and the Dublin system still upholds the illusion that it's a national issue. So if the asylum seekers come onto the Italian shores, that's Italy's problem. That's not realistic. We have to find a common policy there, and it's very hard to move towards that because this is one of probably the most obstinate issues. I would advocate that we show more flexibility to contribute around Europe, but not necessarily does everybody have to contribute in the very same way. Also with regard to climate policy, we have had policies that allowed for burden sharing between different partners. Not everybody had to contribute just the same. And I would insist that everybody plays a role, but why shouldn't we be more flexible than we have been? Third element, I'm sure that Europe has to come up with a new industrial policy. It's for a long time, industrial policy hasn't been much of a public topic. Now I get the perception that this is changing. Altmaier has said so. CDU has said so. SPD is saying so. We've been trying to say so for a while. I would be very happy if we would understand in Europe that not every country can pursue its own industrial policy, only if we organize a common European industrial policy based on the value chains that we have all around Europe. Then we can stand up to the competition. So that's the third priority. And that includes, in particular, digital and eco-efficiency development. I think they could go well hand in hand. I think digital efficiency could help environmental policies and the other way around. The fourth issue that I would emphasize would be external trade. It's been mentioned shortly. Europe should play an active role in promoting fair and free trade. Not just free, not just fair, both elements, fair and free. And this is where, as this is already a European competency, we can have a major impact. So I think that would be important. And number 5 is about, this is about probably the most difficult, this is about the social pillar. We can argue that this commission under President Juncker has successfully put the social dimension of Europe back on the agenda, where it was missing for quite some time. But we have not yet been able to implement that meaningfully so that the citizens see what's in it for them. And I don't think that we can have just a one-size-fits-all social policy for all around Europe. But why don't we have a European legislation that says in every country there has to be a minimum income according to the different national conditions of which people can, well, feed their families until the end of the month and not just a few days before that. And there are other elements like youth unemployment that we should focus on. And I think we could do more on this in this dimension of Europe. So these would be, for me, the 5 most important priorities. And on top of that, we are, of course, confronted with the development where some member states don't want to adhere to the rule of law. And I believe in this case, we cannot just rely on the European Parliament or the European Commission. Unless the member states really put their own efforts behind that battle, it will never succeed. If we lambast Mr. Orban from the European Parliament and the European Commission just the same, and the governing party from Bavaria always keeps inviting him and applauding him, then he will not believe that we will really draw red lines in this, or draw lines in the sand that he will not be allowed to cross. If the member states don't stand up for the same rule of law principle as the European Commission and the European Parliament, then he might just continue. So in that regard, it's not just an issue of the next European Parliament and the next European Commission. The greatest power in Europe still resides with the national parliaments. And I think we've seen over the last 10 years the absolute necessity for the member states to take ownership of European progress.
Yeah, we have already 6 bowls on our Christmas tree or election tree. And now, what bowls would you like? 1 or 3, 1 or 2? Because I think we are. Do you have 1? 1, you have 1, yeah.
Complicated, especially after I said thank you, and this should be the end. But I will rather compliment from the more general point of view, because I guess that the next elections will not be about how many of these balls on Christmas tree will actually materialize and how many will be missing, but it's about more essentials, about issue if there will be sufficient majority of parliament members who will be in favor of developing and further improving functionality of European Union, the way that it will be beneficial for Europeans, or if there will be majority of people that want openly or less openly get European Union on that spiral that is leading to the end. And this, such a fundamental question, will be on the table, because I guess there are two sets of people that two sets of reasons why people are skeptical about European Union. Some people believe that European is doing too much, not very much understanding that this is not European Union, Euro bureaucrats in Brussels, but these are the ministers and the MPs that are deciding such a way. But the second group of people, quite important, that believes that the European Union is not helpful because it's not solving the issue. If the European Parliament will be blocked or will not be able to take decisions and agree to agree on compromises, how to move forward, then this second group will get bigger and bigger. And this is one of the way how to lose the trust. And as I said, that if you lose the trust for something, the future is not very much bright. So I guess this is the most fundamental question.
I have only one point on my wish list for the upcoming elections: a high number of participation, a high turnout, because it's all about legitimation and that the people feel that they decide and that they are responsible for the future of the European Union and of the European Parliament.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for the panelists and your comments and the kaleidoscope of European Christmas ball for the Christmas tree I just called it. And thank you, my thank to the audience too for joining us this evening. I think now I have the honor to invite you in the name of the Sächsische Aufbaubank to invite you for a glass of wine and a little snack just by the door, and I wish you a good way home afterwards. Thank you, and please go voting.